Every single day, millions of people cross international borders, but most of them are mostly never remembered. But one traveler left behind a mystery that still hasn't disappeared. Not because he was dangerous, not because he broke the law, but because of a small detail hidden inside his passport. A detail that should not have existed. And somehow, nearly 70 years later, people are still arguing about it. Some believe it's proof of another reality. Others think it's nothing more than a urban legend. But before deciding, you need to hear the entire story. It supposedly began inside Tokyo's Haneda airport in 1954. A businessman stepped off an international flight. Nothing about him stood out. He looked completely ordinary until he reached passport control. He handed over his passport just like everyone else. The officer opened it, looked once, then froze. He looked back at the traveler, then back at the passport again. Something was terribly wrong. Within seconds, another officer was called over. Then another one. Soon, everyone was staring at the same page, not because of the photograph, not because of the signature, but because of the country printed beside his name. A country never of them had ever heard of. The passport claimed he came from Taured. The custom officer frowned. He quietly called another officer. Within a minute, the passport was being passed from end to end. Nobody recognized the country. Nobody. The businessman could not understand why. To him, they were the one acting strangely. He insists Taured had existed for over 1,000 years. A prosperous nation with its own government, its own history, and its own people. He even claimed he had traveled to Japan before, several times. Everything appeared authentic, until one officer had an idea. If the red exists, finding it will be easy. He slid the map across the table and asked one simple question. An officer then said to him, "Show us." Without hesitating, the businessman leaned forward. His fingers stopped between France and Spain. Today, we call that place Andorra. But according to him, Andorra was not real. That country should have been Taured. The room then fell completely silent because there were now only two possible explanations. Either this man was executing one of the greatest frauds imaginable, or he truly believed everyone else was wrong. And somehow, that possibility felt even more disturbing. Officials had made a decision. The traveler will not be allowed to leave. Not yet. Because by then, this was no longer routine immigration. It had become something else entirely. The passport was taken from him. For the first time, he looked genuinely confused. Not scared, just confused. Because to him, everything was perfectly normal. The officer began checking every page, every visa, every stamp, and every signature. Nothing looked fake. Nothing looked altered. It was a perfectly ordinary passport, except for one impossible word, Taured. The officers searched the record. Nothing at all. They started searching again. Still nothing. Then the phone's call began. Immigration office, foreign affairs, embassies. Hours passed. Every answer was exactly the same. No country called Taured had ever existed. By now, this was no longer an immigration problem. It had become a government investigation, and nobody had any idea what they were really dealing with. As night fell, the authorities reached a decision. The traveler will not be arrested, but he would not be allowed to leave either until someone could explain who he really was. He was escorted to a nearby hotel, a room several floors above the ground. Authorities were not taking any chance. Two guards remained outside his room throughout the entire night. The windows were watched. The hallways was watched. Every possible exit was watched. There was nowhere possible to go. Or so, that's what everyone believed. The following morning, officials returned. They unlocked the door, stepped inside, and immediately froze. The room was completely empty. The businessman had vanished. No broken window, no forced door, no witnesses had seen him leave. According to the legend, it was as if he had simply ceased to exist. But that's not what makes this story so fascinating, because the biggest mystery wasn't his disappearance. It was what investigators discovered when they tried to prove that any of this actually happened. Up until this point, everything you've heard comes from the legend itself. But here's where everything begins to change. Because when historians began investigating, they expect to find evidence. Instead, they found almost nothing. No official police report, no immigration records, no verified government document, not even a confirmed newspaper article. For a mystery this extraordinary, that should have been impossible. So researchers kept digging. Days became weeks, weeks became months. Then they found something unexpected. The oldest version of the story wasn't from Japan. It wasn't even from 1954. In fact, every version seems slightly different. Different airport, different years, and even different name. Even the country itself sometimes change. That was the first real clue. Because real history doesn't rewrite itself, but legends do. And suddenly, the mystery became even bigger. Because maybe the greatest mystery was never Taured. By this point, the story was beginning to fall apart. No reliable document, no official investigation, and no proof that the traveler ever existed. So why are we still talking about him? Because stories like this never really disappear. In fact, they evolve. Each person adds one small detail, one small assumption, one small exaggeration, until eventually the legend becomes more powerful than the truth. And perhaps that's exactly what happened there. Today, most historians believe the man from the red was never real. But strangely, that doesn't make the story any less fascinating. Because the real mystery was never the passport, it was us. Our need to explain the unexplained. Our willingness to believe in possible things when the story is good enough. Maybe the man from the red never walked through another airport, but his story traveled around the world. And somehow, that's almost more incredible, because sometimes the most unforgettable mysteries aren't the ones that happen, they're the ones that we wanted to believe. That was Redline, and this is only the beginning.